Let's do a deep dive with Conversations with Great Minds. Dr. Keisha N. Blain is on the line with us, historian and writer, columnist with MSNBC, associate professor of history at the University of Pittsburgh, president of the African American Intellectual History Society, the 2022 New American National Fellow and Carr Center Fellow at Harvard University, and a member of the School of Social Science, the Institute for Advanced Studies, the author of 2 books, Until I Am Free, Fannie Lou Hamer's Enduring Message to America, and previous book, Set the World on Fire, and co-editor of 400 Souls, edited with Ibram Kendi, ex-Kendi, Dr. Keisha Blain. KeishaBlain is the Twitter handle, and the website is KeishaBlain also, .com. Dr. Blain, welcome back to the program. Your book, Until I Am Free, Fannie Lou Hamer's Enduring Message to America, is absolutely extraordinary. I think you point out early in the book that most Americans know the high-profile civil rights leaders and black leaders of the last 50 years or so, whether it's Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or even Angela Davis, mostly men but a few women. But Fannie Lou Hamer is largely unknown. Tell us about, A, why that might be, and B, tell us about her.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me on to talk about Fannie Lou Hamer. One of the things that I emphasize in the introduction, which, when people ask me this question, why is it that it took so long for me to even learn about Hamer, which I explained I didn't know about Hamer until in my last year of college, even though I was majoring in history and Africana studies at the time. But one of the reasons that I always emphasize is that to this very day, the narratives that we often tell, the mainstream narratives that we often tell about the civil rights movement tend to be male-dominated. Of course, so many great books have been written on Black women's activism and focusing on their contributions to the movement. But by and large, we do still tend to emphasize the efforts of Black men in the movement. And even more so, we tend to emphasize the political work and ideas of members of the Black middle class and elite. As I point out in the book, Hamer had a very different background. Hamer was a disabled Black woman activist from the state of Mississippi. She had a 6th grade education. As you pointed out earlier, she did not know that she had the right to vote until age 44 when she joined the civil rights movement in August 1962. And so I think that Hamer does not necessarily fit within the mold of what many people think about when they are talking about leadership in the context of the civil rights movement. She certainly had a unique background, but as I point out in the book, she left such a powerful legacy, and I'm really hoping that this book helps to move the conversation forward in terms of acknowledging her contributions to the movement.
Me too. We're talking with Dr. Keisha N. Blain, whose new book, Until I Am Free, Fannie Lou Hamer's Enduring Message to America, is just brilliant. Dr. Blain, we record a 6-minute book report, basically, that fills the space on some of our non-commercial stations where our for-profit stations are doing news at the top of the hour and that kind of thing. So very few people of all of our listeners, only a very, very small percentage of them actually heard that book report that I was reading. So I think we could safely revisit that territory and dig a little deeper into her. She was the granddaughter of enslaved people. And tell us about her life as a sharecropper. I think probably most Americans today don't even know what sharecropper means.
Yeah, so sharecropping is a system that ultimately replaced slavery. And so in the Southern context, once slavery was abolished with the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865, white landowners introduced a system, whereby many of the African Americans who had been working on the plantation would be able to continue working, but in this particular context, they would work. They would utilize tools that they were loaning from the landowner. They would cultivate crops, and they would receive a share of the crops. So with the system of sharecropping, essentially, Black people remained in a system of dependency and debt. They didn't own the land, had little prospect to own the land, given the circumstances. And it was ultimately, as I point out, a system that closely mirrored institutional slavery. And so Hamer was the youngest of 20 children, born into a sharecropping family. And as I point out in the book, she started as a sharecropper, believe it or not, at the age of 6, when she was lured into the practice of sharecropping when the white landowner, compelled her to pick cotton and promised to give her, candy from the store.
Wow.
And so this was, really, just remarkable when you think about the lengths to which, white landowners would go to exploit black labor, and certainly did not mind exploiting the labor of a 6-year-old in this context. And so this was a life that Hamer knew. It was certainly shaped by poverty, also by hunger and exploitation. But she drew from these experiences to ultimately bolster her political activism later in life.
Yeah, I just learned. I think what you just said is that sharecropping is called sharecropping because the people are living in somebody else's house, working on somebody else's land, and in exchange for that, they get a small portion of the crop that they produce. Is that right? They get a share of the crop, and then they have to go out and sell it? Is that how it works?
Right, but also, and then of course, keep in mind that they have to take care of themselves and their families, right? So even the share that they are receiving, they have to rely upon that to sustain themselves. And oftentimes they're paying back a fee for use of the tools, for example.
Right.
Truly exploitative, meant to keep you constantly relying on the white landowner.
Yeah, it's the old I owe my soul to the company store. In this case, it's you're paying rent to that person and everything else. So Fannie Lou Hamer, in her 40s, if I'm remembering correctly, shows up for a SNCC meeting, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so in August 1962, at the time Hamer is 44 years old, she attends this mass meeting. And this is organized at a local church in Louisville, Mississippi, Hamer's hometown. Now, this is a meeting, as you point out, that was organized by activists in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. This is a group that played such a pivotal role in black voting rights in the United States. It was grassroots. It was student-led. In fact, many of the leaders of the movement were college age at the time. And so Hamer attended this meeting, and it was really both a spiritual and political awakening. As I explained in the book, she came to understand that not only she could play a key role in the expansion of black political rights through the knowledge that she obtained, understanding that she could vote as a citizen of the United States, but she also came to view her spiritual calling as tied to that political work. And she began to, she immediately joined the movement. She became a field organizer for SNCC, and she thrust her whole life into it. In fact, from August 1962 until March of 77, when she passed away, Hamer remains involved with the movement. And I just think that particular meeting was the beginning of something truly remarkable. I mean, we now know about Fannie Lou Hamer often through the context of the 1964 Democratic National Convention, but it's 2 years later that she had joined the movement and decided to commit herself to expanding black voting rights.
Dr. Blain, you talk in the book about the impact that Fannie Lou Hamer's story had on you, and your hopes for the impact that it will have on other young people, other people who are concerned about rights, civil rights in the United States. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I think one of the challenges when we talk about the civil rights movement, and I find this when I teach courses on this topic in particular, when we focus on so many of the figures we tend to talk about, such as Martin Luther King Jr., such as John Lewis, Angela Davis, and so many others, I think there's often a feeling, and this is among my students in particular, whereby these individuals are so extraordinary, and they certainly are extraordinary, but the notion is that they are so extraordinary, and sometimes the interpretation is that they are so far removed from our everyday experiences, and also the interpretation is that how in the world could I contribute, or could the person sitting next to me contribute, because we are not Martin Luther King Jr. or Angela Davis. I mean, I think what is so crucial about Fannie Lou Hamer's story is that it gets all of us to see how an ordinary person, right, an ordinary person with limited financial resources, someone with a sixth-grade education, someone who was disabled, who grew up in poverty, from the South, could ultimately shape national politics in such a meaningful way. And certainly there are aspects of Hamer's story that we can talk about as extraordinary and remarkable. But I think the message here is really trying to figure out how all of us can tap into our leadership potential in whatever context it may be, whether it's, within our communities, whether it is on a national level. And so I think it's the kind of story that I hope people find inspiring, but more so that it gets them to think, okay, what can I do? What tools do I have? What resources do I have? What skills do I have that I may be able to use in the interest of making this world a better place? And that's partly, why Hamer shaped my life the way that she did, in encountering her, as a college student, as someone from a working class background, as someone who felt so out of place as a first generation college student, for example. I think it was reading Hamer's story that compelled me to imagine the possibilities of how I too can make a difference. In this case, using my writing, using my research.
Dr. Blain, one of the chapters in your book is titled words to the effect of, the special plight of black women. Can you speak to that?
Yes, one of the things that's so powerful about Hamer's story is thinking through the way that her ideas about women's empowerment helped to shape the women's liberation movement. And as I point out in the book, Hamer did not self-identify as a feminist. She certainly never called herself a feminist. But what is clear is that she really helped to shape the movement by emphasizing exactly that, the special plight of black women. So, for example, she, in collaborating with a number of activists in the National Women's Political Caucus, a group that she helped establish in 1971, she spoke particularly about the experiences of black women, because she wanted white liberal feminists to understand in particular that even though they were right to talk about sexism and they were absolutely right to talk about patriarchy and the importance of dismantling these kinds of perspectives, she wanted them to also have not only a class analysis, but ultimately adopt a racial lens. So she wanted them to talk about racism and white supremacy. She also wanted them to confront classism. And here's where we can see through Hamer's words and ideas what we later described through the writings of Kimberly Crenshaw as intersectionality. And so I talk about Hamer as one of the foremothers of intersectionality and getting us to think through the intersecting systems of oppression, the intersecting forces that shape individual lives. In this particular context, Hamer wanted to shed the light on black women's unique experiences in the United States.
It's often occurred to me that, and I'm sure this is not any kind of an original thought, that for white people in the United States for hundreds and hundreds of years, race was a lazy person's way of enforcing class. Does that make sense to you? Can you speak to that?
Well, I was about to say, can you elaborate more on that?
Sure. If 300 years ago or last year, if a white person who had power and privilege in society was essentially enforcing class, let's consolidate all the wealth here, let's consolidate all the power here.
Right.
You could do it, maybe in West Virginia, in an all-white community, you could do it just based on, who was born with the money, who's got the land kind of thing. But when it's white people coming in, interacting with black people, then that, from the point of view of essentially white supremacists and white racists, has historically been an instant label of class, in as much as black people are deprived of power and authority and agency. I'm sure I'm mangling this description. This is not, my field.
Yeah.
But can you speak to that?
Well, I think one of the things that's so important for Hamer's analysis was how we need to understand that it's impossible to disentangle
exactly
these things, right? So you can talk about class, and you must talk about class. But if you talk about class without any kind of racial analysis, then in the end, you ultimately overlook the experiences of millions of people. I mean, in the context of the U.S., but also what you do is that you don't grapple with the legacies of slavery, and certainly on a global lens, then you're not grappling with the legacies of colonialism, and there's a way that you're able to push aside, not only white supremacy, but put aside these institutional racism. You push aside structural racism, right? And you don't grapple with how, for decades, for centuries, there are these systems that have historically excluded some groups from all aspects of American society. So I think Hamer's point is that, which is similar to the point that I think legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw is making with this notion of intersectionality, is that we cannot disentangle all of these systems of oppression. We have to talk about them collectively because our life experiences reveal how much they are all connected.
And it's not just race, it's also gender.
Right. Exactly. And certainly sexuality, right? I mean, and then we can talk about ability, so just so many different aspects that I think Hamer's story helps us see the power of taking this multidimensional approach. I think is perhaps the best way to explain it.